Yo, hey everyone. Thank you for joining Power Hour. We have a super fantastic guest here today in the form of Pouyan Salehi, founder of Scratchpad. We're gonna let folks kind of trickle in here for our conversation and our Q&A, our nerd sesh, if you will. But while we're doing that, Pouyan, any big plans for the weekend? Anything cool you've been doing with the family recently that you would recommend?
Well, I'm in Minneapolis right now, and the snow has finally melted. So getting the kids out on a bike ride. I recently learned that my 7-year-old, I took him on a bike ride, and he could cry for 2 miles straight while pedaling.
Talent.
Yeah, that is true talent right there.
Good good cardiovascular capacity right
You got to
there.
have your breathing dialed in just right to be able to do that, you know? So that was, to his credit though, it was cold. It was cold and windy, even though there was no snow.
So he's an emergent Peloton superstar.
Well, I mean, it actually, part of the reason I took him out, I got convinced to sign up for a triathlon, and I am not a triathlete by any means. And so that's the plan. Get on a bike and run and get in the water and swim. So that's what I'm doing.
So your 3-year-old is the coach. He's just like coming behind you crying, and you're like running away. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, it's a new training method.
Yeah, sounds yeah, maybe workshop that one a little bit.
Yeah,
cool. Well, we can get this party started. So hey everyone, welcome to MSP Power Hour. I'm your host, Pete Kazanjy. So while we're getting started here, I'd like to give folks kind of a couple minutes to get familiar with the Zoom webinar interface here. This event highly encourages audience participation. So please do use the chat panel. You can ask us questions, because that's literally what what the purpose of this is to do. Use the chat panel, use the Q&A panel, et cetera, et cetera. So before we get into introductions, just kind of a little bit of background here. For folks that are not familiar, Power Hour is hosted by Modern Sales Pros. MSP is the world's largest revenue leadership community for those in sales management, sales and revenue operations, sales development related disciplines. And so the community's mission is pretty straightforward. It's to create an environment for our 30,000 and growing members to answer questions that they'd struggle to solve on their own, and kind of help them see around corners that they may not know about. And so the mechanism by which we do that is through great live sessions like this. We have a robust online forum for Q&A, and we currently have in-person events happening. We actually had one last week, 2 weeks ago. We had dueling bi-coastal happy hours for our virtual summit, which was pretty dope. We in San Francisco and New York. So we're gonna be having more of those in the future, which is great. Little throwback to the MSP salons of back in the day. Gonna get jamming on those. So for those of you who weren't previous members, you'll be admitted. It'll be great. You'll be pumped. So before we get started, just a couple of reminders. Power Hour is a little bit of a unique forum. It's not like this isn't a specific masterclass. It's not going to be a presentation or whatever. The idea here is we're picking the brain of a sales leader or sales industry denizen. Like,
thank you for not using expert.
Yeah, guru. Here. And the whole idea here is Q&A. There was a bunch of questions that were kind of submitted ahead of time. Pouyan's been around the block. I've been around the block a little bit as well. And so lots of information here, lots of wealth of knowledge for kind of helping people think through their sales motions, sales excellence, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the whole idea here, is like, you're here to learn. We're here to learn. So please do ask your questions, et cetera. So with that, let's go ahead and make some introductions here. I'm Pete Kazanjy. I am the founder of Modern Sales Pros. I am also the founder of Atrium. For those who don't know, Atrium makes data-driven sales management software that helps sales managers, so AE, SDR, AM, CSM managers and their leadership use metrics and data to improve rep performance. Prior to that, I ran a software company called Talent Bin. I was a recruiting software company that was acquired by Monster Worldwide in 2014, and then subsequent to that, I ended up writing a book on early stage sales called Founding Sales, and started Modern Sales Pro. So that's a little bit about me. Think about sales just a bit and Pouyan, you want to kind of give folks the
Sure.
synopsis on your background, and then maybe we can talk a little bit about like Scratchpad sales motion. I'm sure a lot of people who are on the call today are Scratchpad customers, much like we are. But yeah, take it away.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's awesome to be here and see all the names coming in as well. So quick background on me and why I might even have anything to say here. Lots of battle scars.
That's
I
true.
think that's certainly more it. Have taken lots of blows and punches and have gotten back up more than I'd consider and being an expert in anything, to be honest. But a lot of folks ask for like, were you just like passionate about sales because you've done a few companies in sales now? And I think the way I got into all this was, I studied engineering background, went to business school, worked at Apple for a while, and always just loved building stuff. I never really thought like I'm going to be building sales software for 9 years and now going on much longer. But when my co-founder and I started working together, we had built products. They didn't get traction. And so we built other products that started getting some traction. And guess what? We had to learn how to sell. And when you're just two founders, I'm a firm believer in founder-led sales. And, Pete knows a few things about that. Actually, a lot of what you wrote helped us. But the way that I even got pulled into it and my co-founder got pulled into it as well is, we had built stuff and we realized that sales is one of the most important parts of building anything, and especially up front. So we just did it. We read books, we cold called, we literally did everything that we possibly could. And in going through that experience, we started to build empathy for sales.
Yeah.
Both, I think how exciting it can be, but also all the challenges around it from workflows and processes and data and all of that stuff. And that's what led us to start PersistIQ. This was back in, 2014. Like nothing exists around this. You either had Marketo or Salesforce. So we started Persist for salespeople, worked exceptionally well. And we just kept learning more and more problems. And that's what led us to start Scratchpad, which was, which is the first workspace for a salesperson in a revenue team. And when I say workspace, it was built off this observation that every AE has Salesforce and all of these other tools that are thrown at them. But if you actually study how most AEs work, they're still out of working on spreadsheets, notes, like Mac Notes, Evernote, OneNote, and task managers. And what they're doing
is email and inbox.
Yes. Oh no, of course you have email and calendar, but where I manage my work and a lot of that stuff is I'm digitally duct taping my own workspace together. And then we said, gosh, like all other functions have stuff that's designed for them. Why not sales? And that's what led us to start Scratchpad.
Nice. Yeah, and I think we'll get into that a little bit. Can you maybe touch on kind of like what Scratchpad's kind of like current sales motion looks like, who the personas are, who are involved in the sale, kind of like, I know that I think you guys have a pretty muscular land and expand motion. I mean, I showed up and I was like, hi, I need 10 seats, which I think is probably like not common, not as common, maybe more and more as the category is now like instantiated. People just show up and they're like 15 please, or like 30 please. Maybe you can kind of touch on that, because that way people will kind of be like, oh, okay, that's like my sales motion, or I should ignore Pouyan.
Yeah, gosh, so there's a lot of content out there around sales motions that I think try to bucket them and label them. It's like, you are top-down enterprise, you are PLG. The reality is, I don't know for different companies, but for us, we're like, well, shit, we're kind of both. I don't know what we are. It's hard for me to label it. And so what we've done is just stop doing that. Could you look at Scratchpad and say, holy cow, you are a PLG at the core? Yes, we are. Could you look at us and say we're top down? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really thoughtful observation, because it just turns out it's like, don't think of it as like a unified play. Think of it as there's like 4 plays, right? Or there's like, 4 or 5 like paths. Like we run into this too, where we have these like various flow charts in Lucid Charts or in like Google Slides or whatever, where it's like, oh, in an organ, because Atrium sells to like SMB, mid-market, sales organizations. So like anyone who's got like between 5 AEs plus SDRs all the way to like 300 or something like that. Like we kind of avoid like super enterprise or whatever. But then what's interesting is like between those, different folks, like you'll have these organizations down here that don't have any sales operations staff in place, and as a result they have like no, they have no metrics, they have no analytics or whatever. So like in that situation, like the sales motion is like this. And then in a situation where there is somebody who has like a sales operations person in place and like a certain amount of either if they're new and they don't have any analytics in place, and the sales motion it's different from this one, right? But it's just a little bit different, right? And so that's like play B. And then there's other ones where like, now that we have whatever it is, like 300 customers or whatever, we have a lot of like sales leaders who like go off somewhere else and they'll come inbound. They'll be like, I want to introduce you to our CRO and our SVP of ops. And so like that conversation is very different versus like entering from a PLGE standpoint, like, because kind of like not as easily as Scratchpad, like obviously we have a very easy like entry point into organizations where anybody can turn on an Atrium account in like 3 minutes. And so like that conversation, we're like, let me go ahead and help you and introduce you to the SVP of sales operations is a very, very different conversation. So I think like knowing which of these plays is in front of you, right? So I guess it's kind of like being the quarterback and like reading the defensive schema and being like, oh, okay, here's the situation, ends up being like a really important thing. And I think that like it can be tough for reps. And I think you guys see this a lot with what you guys do, because like as an example, we use Scratchpad for like structured note taking and also data entry, but kind of like helping people understand like, oh, this is the play I should deploy in this situation, and then have like a structured workflow. How do you see people like doing that rather than the reps just like playing, scatterball, right?
For our own reps?
No, for your customers as well, because I imagine like we use Scratchpad to do this, right? Like we have our disco questions all like mapped out. I don't think we've gotten as nuanced to have like different templates of situations, like, oh, okay, you're talking to this persona, so you should have these questions or whatever. Now that we're talking about this, I'm like, man, maybe I should do that.
And it's, this is what makes it so hard. I feel like we're so, and when I say we, let me clarify that as leaders of organizations, whether you are the CEO co-founder or whether you are the sales leader or RevOps leader, what I have seen in my experience is we have this mindset where we generally need to be quick to have an answer. What's your sales process? How are you going to scale this thing? How many people are you going to hire? What are the steps that you need to follow? And for right reason, right? There's external pressure that exists to do that, whether it's from the board or whether you're the sales leader and it's coming from your CEO. Right. What I've learned though is when you're forced to have an answer quickly or you're seeking the answer, it blocks you off from actually seeing what's in front of you. And so maybe saying, hey, we don't have the complete answer. And we're going to be in this state where there's a lot of unknowns and we're going to slowly build that thing up. And the reason that's so important is because it may help you see that your motion is not that clear cut. In some ways, everyone thinks, oh, PLG is the best thing. People just sign up, it naturally grows, and then they just buy it. And I'm like, it is, I wish it were that simple. In some ways, I'm envious of companies that don't have it, because it is in a way simpler, right? You talk to somebody, you qualify them, and you see, okay, the sales process you can define a little bit more. When you have a bottom-up PLG type motion, it adds multiple layers of complexity to it. And
more scatterball.
It really is. And so I think the challenge in that is in building out the revenue organization is how do you start building some structure and some clarity to that so that folks on the team know what they're supposed to do. What is the structure of the team? How do the different team members play together? And that's something that we're focused on internally, but I also see that with a lot of the companies that we work with.
Because it's not like a linear like exactly. I think that's well stated. And actually Jocko, I'm always quote Jocko because he's eminently quotable because this stuff is very good. But I think he we have like, you have your traditional conception, like you were just talking about, like, oh, here's this like med picky sort of thing where like we start here and then we go here and then we go here and then we have like proof of value and so on and so forth, right? And from a top down standpoint, that like where like that obviously still has its plates. It's more challenging in an emerging category where there is not there is not a category on it that like Gartner has instantiated, and as a result, like the CIO is not looking for this required capability and so on and so forth. So what ends up happening is like linear stages don't end up like actually mapping to where the deal is at. And instead it's almost kind of like, I don't know, like putting together a puzzle. I don't know what the right metaphor is. Like you need to capture data, and it's like not linear. It's more kind of like, oh, we checked this box.
That's right.
We haven't checked this box over here. Although sometimes we could check this box first before we check this box. And there's like 15 boxes that need to be checked. And so providing reps the mechanism by which to understand where they are, like how many of those boxes have been checked off, is a really important thing from a consistency standpoint. And of course, the traditional mechanism by which you do this is like you put a bajillion fields on the opportunity and put validation rules in place, what have you. But which can be very challenging though, because if you think about it, like how do you traditionally do those validation rules? You can't get to this stage unless these things are filled out.
Yeah.
Well, what if it ceases to be linear? So like, how do you guys see folks doing a better job of like facilitating that information capture to help the rep understand where am I in the deal without it being like a straight jacket of validation rules and what have you?
Yeah, that's such a good point, because and just for context, we're working with companies that are newer, younger, just getting their sales team off the ground, 10, 20 salespeople, with companies that have been around and are growing very quickly, like have 100 and they're getting to 500 in the next year. And also with companies that have tens of thousands of salespeople. So I think I could probably name a few of them because they're public and on our site, like Twilio, big public company.
I was just talking to the new CRO of Vanta earlier today. She's former Twilio Stevie. They have a bajillion Scratchpad users, right?
Yeah, exactly. So like we've got them as customers, Vanta, big customers as well, and also I'm just a huge fan of their product, which helped us be able to have the secure posture to be able to serve those customers. So that works out well. No, but I say that in just so you know the breadth of the range of customers that I'm talking about and that we have exposure to and that we're supporting. So if you put, again, just sharing what I've learned in talking to a lot of sales leaders, rev ops leaders, sales ops folks, enablement, the tools that they have at their disposal are Salesforce, page layouts, validation rules, required fields, and flows. Like that's mostly it, right? And
so those are the Legos.
Yeah. So with those Lego blocks, you can create different flows, you can create structures. And what ends up happening though, is what you said, you end up with very linear and very rigid flows. You cannot proceed to this next stage unless you have these things filled out. And what happens is over time, debt builds up because nobody goes back and cleans Salesforce up.
Oh yeah.
Right? Like you have a new team come in, somebody gets promoted, or you have a reset, or guess what? You change your entire sales methodology. And so what ends up happening is let's bury just enough so that we can start new and like hide some fields, but a lot of stuff gets in there. So what happens is over time, you build up even more debt. It becomes even more just rigid, like a straitjacket where you can't move. So what does that do? It forces people outside of the system.
Yeah, they just bail.
They bail.
They start running shadow CRMs.
That's exactly it. And that was the observation that we had is people are doing the work. It's not that they're not capturing information or what have you. It's just that the CRM doesn't see it. But most AEs I know, they're not, it's not like they're lazy on data capture or anything. It's like, no, they know their deals in and out. But guess what? It's in Evernote or it's in that Excel sheet or Google sheet. And it's not just the rep. I've seen entire teams develop their own Google Sheet template that they're basically running sales out of, and all the way up to the VP level, where at that level, then they'll go back into Salesforce to update it for forecast. So
exactly. Yeah, the thing that gets updated in the CRM is like close date, amount, and like forecast category, and it gets done on like Friday afternoon.
Yeah, and if all the other stuff is required, it somehow magically appears at the last minute. You're like, whoa! All of a sudden, the deal closed in like.
Yeah, pre-close one. Yeah, exactly. Right. Whoa, it jumped 4 stages.
Yeah, so all of that stuff happens. But I think to answer your question before, of like, how do you get around this very rigid structure when deals may not be that linear, and they generally aren't. They're using tools that are so flexible that don't force them into a linear structure. Right. And so they're able to talk about their deal or think about their deal and communicate their deal to their manager or the rest of their team in a way that makes sense because it has that level of flexibility. I think that's where we'll eventually get to over time. It's going to take some time because a big part of this is, as you mentioned, like just the maturity. A lot of folks, when they first see or hear about Scratchpad, they're like, oh, like that's the tool for AEs and that's what they're using. I'm like, yeah, that's right, because that's what you'll find on our marketing site. But what happens is when you actually get in, and why companies like Twilio and Vanta and Segment and all these other companies have leaned in so heavily, is because RevOps sees this as a completely different tool in their tool belt to be able to achieve the same outcomes, which are, how do I get great process adherence? How do I get great data capture? How do I also give my reps what they need to be successful, not just as an individual, but as a team? And I think that level of flexibility is slowly what's becoming possible in the minds of sales organizations. Say, oh, like there is another way to do this outside of these very strict rules.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that, so I think there's a great point there around, like, first we got to get the data capture right, but do it in a way that isn't like a hammer, but instead is like, hey, we're going to make this really easy for you to capture this information. It's also, it always kind of cracked me up when people would always hit like the old joke about like, oh, the CRM is not further up. Well, it actually is, because like, it turns out like trying to keep like 30 deals or 40 deals in your head, like that's not really possible.
Yeah.
Right. Like we're just humans, right? Like we're not designed for like keeping all that kind of like in state. So then like, this is why like writing things down or kind of like, scoring things or what have you is really helpful. It just has to be like, the juice has to be worth the squeeze. Like, I would love to record things out of my brain if it didn't take 3 seconds for this page to save every time I update a field, right? So if you solve that problem, then now you're getting better data capture in the world, and then that makes it such that managers can better manage, perhaps on a deal by deal basis. And so like one of the ways that organizations have tried to skin this cat historically is they try to start using like implicit data, like, and we have a little bit of this in like Atrium, where it's like, email tracking or like phone tracking or kind of like meeting, like, information off the calendar or whatever. Those signals are good, but they're not very like crisp. To like and like to the sales motion in question, right? Because like this is the thing, is like different sales motions have different physics, and they have like different like important linchpins and what have you. So once you start capturing that information, good things happen, because then managers can inspect better, and managers can inspect better, and then they can coach better and offer better expertise there if they're willing to do it. And I think that's a really interesting thing, where even if you solve like the data capture problem, then there's like potentially a human problem of helping junior managers, or like managers in general, do a better job of inspecting and kind of coaching and holding accountable. Because like, if you've never had that data historically, why would you have ever developed the muscle to inspect? So like, how do you guys kind of see that playing out in with your customers and kind of in the market right now, of like, these managers who now all of a sudden have to like, now they have the data to inspect, as opposed to before it was like always story time, but now it's maybe like, oh, I don't know how to inspect on this stuff.
Yeah, it's such an interesting point, because I feel like we're at this stage where, in the conversations I've had, so many folks are focused on the data capture part, that they almost don't think about the world that exists when they have the data.
Now what?
How do you use the data? Who's going to use the data? So let's stick with the data capture first for a second, and then I'll talk about, or I'll just share some of my thoughts on the data usage part. With data capture too, it seems to be binary thinking. Do we have the data or do we not? Right? Are the fields filled out or are they not? And with some of the customers we've talked to, they put in the validation rules, they put in the required fields, so then they started getting the data. Like, okay, our data capture did increase. It came with a lot of complaints, right? So morale went down and took a hit. So if you just think about these levers, or like this graph that you're to play, like, all right, this thing goes up, but what takes a hit?
Right.
Some productivity took a hit, morale took a big hit. But what ended up happening is when the managers actually went into, and this was specifically MedPick, they'd implemented MedPick. Sure. Which a lot of organizations are doing, and we
just dropped we dropped 300K on force management, and now everything's better, right?
Oh, that's a steal. I mean, this company dropped over $1 million on it, and it was,
we're in the wrong business, dude.
Yeah, I know. That too. Gosh, we're fighting for seats here. No, but what happened is then the managers were looking at the data. They're like, this is shit. Like
Okay.
this doesn't tell me anything, right? And so in a way, what started off as like good intent ended up hurting pretty much every part of the business, except for somebody could now report up and say, guess what? Data capture increased.
Mm-hmm.
But if you zoom out and say, well, why are we doing this in the first place? Why are we implementing MedPick? Why are we trying to capture data from our sales process? It's generally so we can be more successful, right? We can make better decisions. We can help coach our team members. We can help our reps actually stay organized, like assess their own deals.
Did win rates go up? Did deal cycles compress? Did win rate from stage 3 go up? So we stop having these things that are in like stage 3 or stage 4 that close loss, where it's like WTF, like how could that possibly be that, you know, far down and then close loss, not for competitive reasons, but because there actually wasn't an initiative. It's like, guess what? Like, right. Okay. Like those would be the true measures, as opposed to like, you know, there's more fields filled out.
So those I think would be the lagging indicators. If you would look back and say,
100%.
okay, we did these things and then win rate went up, all these things happened, right? But what I think forward-looking indicators could be would be like, if you just went to the manager, if you're like, let's say if I'm the rev ops person implementing this and I went to the managers on my team and say, hey, are you noticing a difference? Are your conversations with your reps any different here? Are they more substantial? Are there certain deals you've pulled out of the forecast because you realize they haven't even gone to red lines yet? Or, you know, this person's saying, oh, they're going to close, they got the budget, but they don't have a good understanding of why they're going to purchase. So I think my point here, and again, we were talking about data capture, is that it's not just about data capture. It is about the quality of the data that's captured, and it's about how fresh that data actually is. You know, do you want your MedPick fields filled out with bullshit, or do you actually want some real substance in there that is constantly being updated? And that level of granularity, I have yet to see where most organizations get to. Most, if they're even doing it, is like, do we even have coverage on these fields?
Yeah, 0.0.
Exactly. And so I think that's one area where we're certainly helping a lot with, because when you bring it into the workflow of a rep, which is they're already doing it, right? I have the information. Can I just get into the system?
Yeah,
then
quickly. Is it on the right sidebar next? I'm sending my follow-up email or whatever, and like, is the right sidebar right there? So I can just be like, oh, duh.
Exactly. In Gmail and Calendar, in Zoom, honestly, wherever, right? And I think this is one of the hardest parts about building product for sales is salespeople all work so differently. And so how can we build a system that is flexible enough to the way that humans work? And humans are all very different in terms of processing information, but wherever it is, however it works for you, however you think, whether you like bullet points or you like to write long scripts, if we can make it work for you and it gets into the system, you're happy because it's in your flow. But I think the quality, with my point here is like the quality of the data matters a lot. And that's not something I'm seeing a lot of organizations really dig into yet. The other part though, and this is an exercise I like to do myself, is with any initiative, just imagine a world where you're working backwards from success. And in this case, it would be, okay, imagine we snap our fingers and we have perfect data. Every field in Salesforce that we put in there is filled out and it's recent and it's fresh. Then what?
Yeah.
What does my day as a manager look like? Who is
now we got to manage on it and coach on it. Yeah. He's like, are the meetings happening? What are their agendas, et cetera?
Well, it just becomes a question of, how are you going to use the data? And then you can answer the question of, gosh, should we even capture this data?
Yeah, exactly.
Because we've gotten in this mode where like, we just want to capture data. It's like, I put all these fields in, marketing wants this data, finance wants this data, legal wants this data. Before you know it, you have AEs that are basically filling out surveys and for the rest of the team. But critically challenging yourself and your own organization to say, okay, assume we have this data. What are you going to do with it? How often are you going to look at it? What decisions are you going to make with it? And working backwards from that. And I think that just leads to so many insights about what you should be doing and how you're going to use that data and honestly, how it's even going to help your business.
Yeah, and I think that the challenge, there's this really great article by Nate Silver that I mentioned, I don't know, probably like every 3 or 4 power hours, called Rich Data, Poor Data. So like Nate Silver is the pollster, and then also he does a bunch of like sports analytics stuff too, which is pretty fun. But like his point is that like you can't have an analytical muscle in a given like even a given category or discipline or whatever, if the data is not there. And so he used sports analytics as the best example of this, where like the reason why baseball had analytics show up to it first is because baseball had a bunch of data, because the game is pretty slow, right? So it can be manually scored, kind of like filling out medpic fields, right? It can be manually scored. There's 30 teams or whatever. There's 160 games a year. It's like big sample sizes, 100 years of history, et cetera. So you have all this data, and anyone who's like watched the movie Moneyball or read Moneyball or whatever will get this. But like when it first started out, like even though the data was there, people didn't know what the hell to do with it.
Yeah.
And it obviously was like there was a big sea change that had to happen, and largely like if you've watched Moneyball, like mainly a bunch of people had to retire or like die or whatever in order, like teaching old dogs new tricks can kind of be a challenge. But then it got better and better and better and better. Like, and so the first step, of course, was like they used data in order to recruit, in order to say like, hey, this person looks like, he doesn't look like central casting shortstop or whatever, but like, man, look at his on base percentage, and like, look at his, his on base percentage plus slugging, et cetera. Like this guy is awesome, and he's like half price compared to everybody else. But then it's moved into other things as well, like, hey, we're going to use data in order to decide how we're going to pitch to this person. We're going to use data like real time, right? Like we're going to use data in order to like move these people over here on the field. And I think that's happening in our industry as well, where like, use Atrium as an example. When you didn't have data back in the day, you can't really do like performance analysis and kind of like data-driven management on it. Okay, well now all of a sudden you do have it, because the metrics are well known. Like, okay, this is how we measure organizations, like bookings and wins and ASP and win rate and opportunity conversion rate, et cetera, et cetera. And the data is being captured, and we have APIs that hook into the email system, the calendar system. Okay, great. Now we have this. Now what? Well, shoot, now you've got a bunch of managers, whether they're like, 40 something or 50 something, and don't necessarily like came up in an environment that was data sparse. And so now they have to learn how to interpret this stuff. Ideally, the software does the interpretation as well. And then you have like more junior folks who are like more open to it because they've grown up with Whoops and Pelotons and Fitbits and what have you. But like, there's still a non-trivial human component, which I think is really important from a customer success standpoint, to make sure that like you're kind of bringing these people along. Like we do a bunch of stuff on this. Like all of our customer success people are very, very heavily like sales operations, either trained or have backgrounds. We have Richard Harris do a manager training once a month for like all of our customers. Like anybody who's a Atrium customer could just send their managers to like this like half-day workshop, in order, because it's like it's the human side as opposed to the technical side.
Yeah.
And I think that you guys probably have a similar situation as well, where you have these managers where it's like, oh my gosh, I have all this data available to me now. What am I going to do with it?
Yeah. And I think that it's such a good point, because the data just informs you, but you still have to know what questions to ask.
Yeah, do something about it.
And do something about it. That's right. And so, gosh, it's hard. I don't know what else to say. It's like,
yeah.
I certainly feel for sales managers, because you've got that number and you've got to hit it based on influence of the team. But yeah, one thing that we're seeing, managers really leaning into the idea of a workspace for sales, aka what we're building at Scratchpad, because what they see now is a faster way to access the information that they need. So if you and I, instead of having to work out of a Google sheet and then go back to Salesforce to look at some information here, but we have one place where, in advance of the one-on-one, and a lot of teams are going remote now as well. And so the async work is so important for us to both get up to speed. If you're my manager, Pete, in advance of our one-on-one, I just share a link with you from Scratchpad that's got all my deals, everything's filled out, because I'm working out of the spreadsheet anyway. And then you see it. And then you have a Google Sheet style commenting system on top of it. We're already so much further ahead than we used to be on our one-on-ones. And so what you're going to be able to do now is help me inspect the deals, help me ask the questions, help me identify the blind spots on the deals that I can then go solve, right? If you're like, oh yeah, I didn't even think about that angle with that one deal, or you have a connection, or let's say our CRO has a connection to somebody there, we just start working better together, right? And so I think having the information easily accessible, not just captured, but easily accessible for everyone to work off of together is key. But then from your perspective, I think the assessment of individual team members based off of data is so important, because
Yeah.
you have that there now. How am I doing on prospecting? Like, how many meetings am I setting on the calendar? Is that trending down? Is that trending up? How fast am I to respond to emails? How many ops am I working? What's the stage? And again, this is less coming from, I think, leading with a stick and like fear and being like, oh, you need to be able to do these
No.
things. But I think as a manager, then asking the question, hey, I noticed, your meetings are going down. What's going on? And maybe there's
Yeah.
a personal thing going on in my life that you can
Totally.
help me with, right? But I think
Right.
that
Like,
insight
or
is
like,
so
oh,
important.
I'm on somebody else's meetings because one of my teammates is struggling and I'm like riding along or whatever. Like, yeah, I think this kind of goes to the point. I did a data-driven coaching masterclass recently that kind of talks about this, like the difference between performance measurement,
Yeah.
right, as opposed to like, and you and I know this because like we get to go and fundraise every 2 years or whatever, and like, go like this, tell a story.
Yes.
But like ultimately at the end of the day, what we're in the economic value creation business, right? And so if you think about that, like what is the economic value
Let me
creation
think
that's
about that.
happening
That's a lot
here?
of, those are some big words. Economic
Yeah,
value.
like what we're doing, like what's changing that's
Yeah.
making the world better, right? And so like that's the way that we think about this, is we say, hey, look, like, data-driven sales management is all about using metrics, not to be like booga 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 booga, right? Like I'm going to make judgments about you from a performance standpoint, but instead to improve performance by pointing out issues. And that's like kind of what you're talking about in that
Oh,
one-on-one.
that's so key. Yeah. I mean, why do
Yeah,
people why do people generally leave jobs? Right? It's the manager, the direct
yeah,
manager. And
they're
so I
grumped
think,
out about like their development or whatever because of their
yeah,
manager, right?
but I think that that's such a good point, because if you're, I mean, the value that you're creating there in the world, or how you're changing the world, is if I can, if I can have a better relationship with my manager, or my manager is able to help me improve and point things out for me that can help me improve, I'm going to be a happier person. Now, I'm assuming people want to improve. Like, I think there's a group of folks
Yeah,
who are like happy just
most
doing what they want to do, but
yeah, most do, but like I think that's the like kind of mindset change that we're in the business of kind of like promulgating in the market, is like, look, this isn't about like performance reviews and this isn't about sticks. It's like what happens every time Tom Brady comes off the field, what immediately happens? Right to the bench, right to a tablet, looking at the last couple plays, like the stuff that's coming down from the booth, et cetera, et
yeah.
cetera, in order to have like an improvement loop before they go back on the field, in order to like to again have an improvement loop, have a good OODA loop there. And I think that behavior, it's so funny because like I get dinged a little bit around like using sports metaphors for this. It's so weird to me though that it's like so commonplace in high school athletics or college athletics or professional athletics or whatever. Then all of a sudden you go into like professional land. It's like, scary, right? Versus
Mhm.
like, what are you talking about? Like anybody who's done, who's done like serious athletics, growing up, knows that like, of course, that's like we use this information to measure and then to improve. It's not for the purpose of like, making people look bad or what have you. But
Well, those are, I mean, what you're doing, if you're doing it right, you've captured, the right, it's all, I talk a lot about systems thinking and like systems design, right? And
yep,
everything in the world, I think you can build as a system. And this is it. The sales is a system, the building a company is a system. But this is why I'm always beating on that drum of know the right metrics in the first place. Like, what you're doing is you're tracking the inputs into the system. And if you have those well thought out, then of course you're going to be able to help performance management and improve, because you know that by focusing on these two things, you even have a shot of improving performance.
yeah, which I think, and then the question kind of becomes like, okay, whose job is that?
Mhm.
Because one of the things that I like to talk about is how one of the things that I like to talk about is like sales operations or revenue operations is kind of like a product manager for the sales organization, kind of like
Yeah.
thinking about it like, they are the curator of the sales motion, they are the curator and the product manager of the harness as well. And so I think one thing that, which is a little bit of a change, a lot of bit of a change for a lot of sales sales operations 10 years ago was like the sales prevention department in the business of like, yeah, cut the territories, dude, or like do comp or whatever, as opposed to kind of like structuring the sales motion and kind of doing the sales strategy. I think one of the things that you had kind of mentioned earlier was this notion of like bringing design thinking into sales operations and revenue operations in order to facilitate what you're talking about. Like, hey, what are the actual things that should be being captured here? Because it reflects the particular proclivities of how our market buys, right? And then how we're going to capture that, and then how that gets followed all the way through to completion.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, you can simplify it even further.
Oh yeah.
What surprises me is how few RevOps people that I've talked to or I've encountered actually sit down and understand what their reps are doing and how they're doing it. Right. I mean, we did this before.
Doing desk sides.
Literally. I mean, me and Cyrus, my co-founder, we literally asked a few companies to go visit them and sit behind their A's and just watch them work for hours.
Yep.
And they turn around and be like, hey, is this really interesting to you? Like, really? I'm just typing.
Totally. It's fascinating.
Yes. Because, and so in that, and here's the impact of it, right? There are constant requests being made of RevOps to capture out information or change processes. And that comes from leadership, the CEO, it comes from finance, it comes from product, it comes from marketing. Let's get some, who are the competitors we were up against this deal? What other products were they considering? All of this stuff. And what happens? RevOps is saying, okay, cool. We need this information. Let me go to Salesforce page layout, add the fields, and then let me think about how I can maybe even put this in a flow and make it required at what point. Rarely do folks think about and actually go execute. What is the impact of adding just one more field?
Right.
And it can have such a devastating impact to how a salesperson actually works. It can completely disrupt and change their flow. And so that's what I mean by design thinking, is understanding and having empathy for the changes that you're making, having empathy for your customer, right? In the way that you describe it of being a product manager. One of the core tenets of being a great product manager is having empathy for your customer, your user.
Right.
What does their world look like? And how might whatever you're building fit into that world? And I just don't see that happening enough in most sales organizations. And
yeah, I wonder how. Yeah, and the reason why is because like as you get bigger, there has to be specialization and abstraction. But I think kind of loop it like this is one of I was talking with I was talking with a sales leader about this morning. Oh, okay, it was the marketing leader at Seismic, and we were talking about the superpower of being your customer for your own product.
Yeah.
Like, so Atrium as an example, like we used to have like 4 or 5 reps. Now we have like 15. And so we're at the point where like, now Atrium is like, before it was like very important. Like I would use it because I'm very data driven and like, of course we were dogfooding. Now it's just like, holy macaroni. How could we possibly keep track of like 15 reps and like 10 SDRs? It would be absolute disaster. Right. And so I think that kind of like, that's a superpower of having a product that you then use yourself. And I'm sure you guys use the hell out of Scratchpad as well. I wonder what the lesson there is for like sales operations, where it's like, hey, use your own product. And by the product, we mean
your own Salesforce instance.
Yeah, like your opportunity layout. Like, yeah, the opportunity
take a deal
layout
from beginning to end and fill out your own medpic fields, right? Just something that's simple.
Yeah,
and I, now I don't want to say like no RevOps team does this. There are a few that we've talked to that that'd
be rad if you did. Like that seems like a very immediate thing that like if someone could just like go through that from soup to nuts, there would probably be a laundry list of insights that would come out of it, right?
If you're thinking about, if you're looking at it through that lens, and what I mean,
but if you have them sit in the role of not like. Don't have them sit in the role of running reports on the data. Have them sit in the role of being the person to populate the data.
But my point is, even if you're going through it, if you're not tuned in to how can we make this easier? How can we simplify it? How can we make it faster? You'll say, well, what the hell's the problem here? There's a field, you fill it out. But the reality is when you're doing this, you're just coming off of one call, you're about to go on the next. You have to go, it takes 3 seconds to load. By the time you put it in there, guess what? Somebody else was on the page, you hit save, It is. You're like, oh, what the?
I'm sorry, Pouyan. The session is no longer valid. Oh,
Oh,
I'm gonna
yeah,
choke my computer.
so that's what I mean by being tuned in. And again, I don't want to overly generalize. There are some revenue operations leaders out there that totally get it. I have been beyond impressed by, they are thinking about how they are thinking about their sales team as their customer.
Yeah,
How
exactly.
can we best serve them? But that's why I'm thinking it's a mindset, right? It takes this level of design thinking to say, okay, that's how can we serve them best? And to do that, you have to have deep empathy for the work that they're doing. And I just think that's such an easy win for most organizations. That doesn't involve any tooling, doesn't involve anything apart from just a shift in mindset and how you spend a little bit of your time that could, to your point, like have immediate results.
Yeah,
Whatever
I
those
think
results may be.
there's a couple of threads on MSP about this, like doing it's not a time and motion study, but it's essentially like the equivalent of like a sales operate, like doing a time and motion study for your and like not doing it. We're like, what do you spend your time on? Which of course, like, AEs are not going to remember because like they're all super busy, but like literally sitting next to them and kind of like watching what happens there. I think what you're talking about is even a deeper version of that, which is like going and actually doing the like what is it called, ethnographic research or whatever. We're like, all right, I'm gonna put on my AE hat, I'm gonna put on my fancy sales shirt, and I'm gonna like run a couple ops here. And like maybe doing that, like you probably can't do that quarterly. Like you could probably do a time and motion study or a time utilization, like time use study, like quarterly, maybe not quarterly. It's kind of like heavy. Like maybe you could do that like, every 6 months or so. But yeah, like, running through the sales process or like riding along, like in a very substantial fashion, kind of like what you and Cyrus did, on like an annual basis, just to be like, all right, let's like audit how much like cruft and brain damage has like made its way into our sales motion and look for, opportunities for refinement. I think like we see that with our customers as well. Like the best sales operations functions
Yeah.
are in the business, like best sales operations and sales leadership are in the business of like manager enablement, right? Like as opposed to, hey, I'm going to sit up here and like I'm going to do the reporting or I'm going to hoard the data or whatever. It's more like, hey, I want to democratize this and hand it to you such that you can use your situational awareness with your reps or whatever, and then like ask next questions and kind of be alerted to things without being reliant on me and kind of like showing up and being a supplicant or like having to file a JIRA ticket for a new looker report or what have you, but like looking for the opportunity to devolve that like those capabilities to the managers can be a very, very powerful
Yeah.
thing, and kind of like giving them the appropriate weaponry in order to like to do their jobs better.
I mean, yes, I think that, and I just saw somebody posting that the riding along is the best. Absolutely. And there's ways that I feel like, I mean, you should be doing that. If I were in RevOps, I'd be doing that at minimum once a quarter. I would also fight for budget to either have like a UX consultant or a researcher, or you can actually, you don't have to do it all yourself. There are other ways to extract those insights. But I feel it's a really tough job because remember, you have these two conflicting things you have to keep in mind. On one side, you're building a system that should scale.
Yeah.
And with that comes structure. That's one of the best ways to scale. But on the other side, you're thinking, all right, how do I serve my sales team as my customer? And recognizing that everyone works a little bit differently, where we, our deals are done differently. We may have different segments and different industries and all of that. And so if I'm in RevOps and I'm in charge of that, then I have to hold both of these two in mind as I'm trying to drive success. How do I build a system that can scale? And how do I make sure that the people that are doing the work that are on the front line are also best supported? That's a really, really hard thing to do.
It's kind of like, what's the joke? Inside of you, there are two wolves, right? Inside every RevOps person, there are two wolves. One that creates structure and fights chaos, and one that wants to be empathetic. And which wolf is going to win today? Yeah,
maybe the wolves start hunting together. I don't know. Maybe it's either or, but I think that's the best. I mean, if you work backwards from success, right? That is the ideal outcome when you have a system that can scale, but that is also serving the folks on the, when I say the front line, not just the AEs, the SEs, AMs, but also the managers, like it's serving them well and they're happy with it. That usually it skews more towards how do we just structure this thing? Because guess what? Leadership is what's driving it.
The general counsel, they can't, I don't want to get fired. I don't want to be responsible for us losing, whatever certification. Oh, great. Let's add more validation rules. Changing gears a little bit. I wanted to get kind of from you, because PersistIQ was a very early sales engagement solution. Obviously, at the time, the market was super hot. I think there was like Persist and SendBloom and Outreach and SalesLoft and Zen Prospect, now Apollo, and and so on and so on and so on and so on. If you what are your biggest takeaways from operating in such a competitive environment? Because I think there's a lot of organizations out there that are, because as the cost of SaaS development falls, and development speed enhances, you get people kind of saying, oh, okay, I'm going to go after, you have people having kind of the same insight kind of simultaneously, and then they start building in a similar direction. I guess the good news in you guys' case is it feels that there's really only kind of two meaningful players in your market. But what would be the biggest takeaways from your time at
Persist?
At Persist? Because obviously Outreach and SalesLoft ran away with the market, which is good because it allowed you to create this new one, Pouyan. But what were the biggest takeaways?
Yeah, I mean, listen, we could talk for hours on the lessons learned there, and just for context for everyone listening. So we started Persist at like I said in 2014, and I had never heard of Outreach. SalesLoft was still scraping LinkedIn at that time. It was just basically yes, we're a tout app, and then you had Marketo. And so we had this insight that there should be something for the individual salesperson to help them start conversations with people they don't know. That was a controversial statement then. When we got into Y Combinator with it, we came out, we ended up raising a seed round, but it was tough. Most VCs were like, there's nothing here. What are you talking about? Salesforce will do this, or Marketo is going to do this. And so it's kind of cool to see we had an insight that has formed several multi-billion-dollar companies, and all the credit to Outreach and SalesLoft for building really great companies. It was tough. I'll be honest. It was an absolute freaking
and Apollo too, right? Long way around. Apollo, different market, kind of way down market, but also with a data component welded on too. But what was that most? They raised $500 million from Sequoia. That's no joke.
Yeah, and there's so many different flavors. I mean, you're right. The data angle came into it. There's a few different flavors. I think SendBloom, like you mentioned, one of those was there at that time. So anyway, it drew a lot of competition.
Yeah, totally.
So a couple key takeaways here in the last few minutes is it's a lot of folks say it's about the product, and I almost feel bad saying this because I love products so much and working on it, but it's not about the product. The product only gets you so far. And one of the mistakes that I think we made is we were so focused on product, both me and my co-founder. I mean, one, we enjoy solving problems where the product has a meaningful impact. We like building great products. And we just thought that by having a phenomenal product will make all the difference in the world. And this was a case where we ran too lean. And what we did, we focused on the product too much and we ran too lean. And what do I mean by those? We didn't appreciate, and looking back, I was like, gosh, I saw the moment now, and we should have done this earlier. We should have raised a lot more capital early on, because what ended up happening was it turned into a game of winning the market and who had a bigger balance sheet and who was better at go-to-market. Because
and also engineering resources and right? Do you have the engineering resources to add the functionality that sales operations is going to be spun up about, as compared to oh, this is the best end user experience for the AE who needs to sell prospect to the SDR or whatever. It's yeah, cool, man. But if this doesn't map to whatever fields or whatever in Salesforce, GTFO, I'm not going to thank you for
the baseline. So here's what and this is why it might be, let me clarify what I mean by the product doesn't matter. It's you have to have sufficient coverage on the product. You have to have all of those things that you're
Yeah,
talking
get
about.
above the bar.
But it becomes mostly check the box features than innovating on anything, to be honest. Because what ends up happening is from the perspective of the buyer, they're like, these are basically sequence tools, right? It's like you sequence, and then maybe one company has this other feature and this one has this other feature, but do they really make that big of a difference? It's kind of like in that last 10%. And so really what it becomes is like, who can create a better buying experience,
Foot race.
who's got more capital, who's getting to more customers. And I think what we didn't realize at that time is how important that go-to-market piece is early on. Now, that's one of the biggest lessons we brought into Scratchpad. Like
we were talking about that earlier, the importance of sales.
The first thing I focused on was go-to-market. Like that drove so much of what we did in the product itself. But, like we came out, we're like, let's just keep talking to customers. Let's just keep building great product. And, we were getting great feedback. People love the product, but what ends up happening is at first the divergence is small in between the competitors, but it's just enough where one keeps going this way before you know it, they're on the $1 billion track, and the other one is like, shit, I'm working just to keep up on the check the box features.
Yeah.
And there isn't enough space in the market to differentiate on something super meaningful. Some tried on like data, some tried on different types of sequences, but it just wasn't enough from a buyer's perspective to say, I'm going to pick this one over that one.
Yeah, especially when it emerges into a category and then it actually becomes an intentional purchase as opposed to a speculative purchase, at which point now someone's like, I need a sales engagement platform. And of course, like they're going to go to Gartner or Forrester or G2 or whatever and like go and look and at that point there's like a feedback loop there that's like very hard to surmount.
Exactly.
So I think that I hear the takeaway here is like, hey, look, the product is really important, but like once you get above a certain bar, you have to start thinking about the other kind of like features that are required, whether that's like pieces of the product for other stakeholders who are purchasers, not users, right?
Well, I would actually say I'd even go a step further and say I guess if the question is, hey, if you're thinking of starting something new or you're working on something now, I would say you've got to keep the product and go to market. And this is why I think sales is so important for every founder or every product manager to also understand is how are you bringing this thing to market from day one? And
there has to be good sync alignment there and like a recursion loop, because otherwise, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, like you keep shipping these things, but our win rates aren't getting better.
Yeah. And it's like, oh, well, guess what? You got it out first, but a quarter or two from now, your competitor brought it out. And in the long game, that may not matter that you had a 1 quarter advantage if you can't if that's not compounded. And that's
right. Or you got it out. You got it out 2 quarters ahead of time. They got it out 2 quarters later, but it dropped into a 50 AE field.
Exactly. Right. And so that makes all the difference in the world. So I think being able to see how things will compound and how you'll be able to stand out in the eyes of whoever your buyer or prospect or customer is, because ultimately that is the only thing that matters. Not how awesome you think your product is or how many features you have or how cool X, Y, and Z is. It simply is, it sounds cliche, but it's like perception is reality. And if I perceive that this product or this company is better than the other one, well, guess what? That's what's really going to matter.
Yeah. Yep. Well, thank you for sharing that, hard won lessons. But the good news is that you get to take those hard learned lessons and bring them on over to Scratchpad.
And learning a whole new set of hard lessons here.
we make new mistakes. That's what we do. We make new mistakes.
Always growing.
If we don't make new mistakes, then we got a bigger problem. But ideally, we're making new mistakes.
Yeah.
Well, Pouyan, this was super rad. Thank you very much for all the insights around data capture and the two wolves of like structure and empathy. And I feel we got to get your VP of marketing to do like there's like the 3 wolf moon shirt. We got to like get the Scratchpad 2 wolf for like. Rep empathy, structure, rep empathy, structure. Yeah. Maybe it's like Godzilla and Mothra, right? But anyway, like absolutely fantastic insights. Unsurprisingly, thank you for joining us. Next week, we have Karina Brockle, who's joining us from Aurora Solar. She's absolutely fantastic. She's the VP of Sales at Aurora, who make software for solar installers. She's absolutely fantastic. Previously was at Box for like a decade, and like all those former Box sales leaders are killers. So she's gonna be with us next week. Pouyan, thank you very much. Have a great
Thanks for
weekend.
having
Okay.
me. Thank you
Yeah,
so
you
much.
bet. Take
Bye.
care.